on their sales numbers. So we help people find new customers and also increase their revenue by capitalizing on word of mouth and other aspects of human behavior. And we do that using a combination of machine learning, behavioral science, and kind of classical maths as well. And that's kind of a summary of what we do, but what does that actually look like in practice? So we detect where brands are being spoken about offline, or in online conversations, but not by listening to those conversations. And then we give those brands the tools to market at those places. And that works across all different marketing channels. But we sort of focus at the moment on performance marketing. So that's online digital marketing, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, Google ads and display as well across the web. To give you a brief history of the company and sort of where this technology came from, don't worry, this isn't like a hard pitch, and I'm going to move on from what we do for good reason in a minute and talk more about our own marketing. But Heardify was built out of a professional services company, which did very similar things in professional services context. Now we're a SaaS-based company, and a lot of the challenges we're facing at the moment is, and I think this is interesting for the session, is how do we take these the sort of high intense research that we were doing as professional service and make it applicable to a much broader range of companies and customers. Now, as I said, we have the main focus that we have is on performance channels. So web adverts, and also we have a partnership with a large door drop company, Whistle, who do door drop delivery. And so we have a partnership with them so people can their customers can use us to help improve their door drop deliveries. But, and this is the big but, we, despite selling a marketing product, can't use our own product for ourselves for two reasons. One, our product has a focus on direct to consumer and e-commerce, which is not what we are. We're a B2B business. The research has been used for B2B businesses in the past, and I'll talk about some examples of that later, but that isn't the principal use that we're going to market with. And that's because it requires a large amount of historic data. And when I say large, I don't mean massive amounts. I mean sort of 2 years worth of sales data at about 100 to 1,000 sales per month. So not big numbers, but a lot more than you have as a startup. And we started with no sales. So at that point, we're definitely not able to use our technology, but we are able to use the ideas that go into that and apply them in different ways in our own marketing. And that's where I'm going to what I'm going to talk about today, and also provide examples that we haven't done ourselves, but things we've discussed and might work for other businesses of different types. So to jump in to sort of a bit of theory of the kind of marketing and behavioral science behind all this. So I'm sure anyone here who works at a startup or a scale up knows starting a new brand is hard, right? People initially, may not even pay attention to any advertising or any marketing you're doing. Gaining traction is really hard. Now, I've written here that people may not pay attention at first. And the reason for that is it's actually hotly disputed in marketing science as to whether people do pay attention to adverts they've not seen before or they don't. So, it's been reported by sort of what you might call marketing gurus going back to the 1880s. There was a kind of a London businessman called Thomas Smith first. Is probably the first person to talk about the fact that, in his opinion, it took people 20 times they had to see the advert before they would purchase, motivated by that. On the other side of the fence, there's someone called John Paul Jones, who's a marketing scientist, who summarized it in 1990, I think it was, by saying once is enough, right? He wrote a book, I think, called How Much is Enough? And his conclusion was once is enough. So it only takes someone to see your advert once. So the scientific point of view is mixed on whether people need to see your adverts more than once, or you just show someone an advert, they read it, they decide, okay, yes, I'm going to buy that, or I'm not. But it definitely feels like, especially in a startup, that the former is true, that it takes time to get traction, and it takes time for people to start really paying attention to your adverts. And this kind of makes sense, not just because it feels right, but also you're in a crowded field when you're advertising. There are lots of other adverts to compete with. So standing out is really hard. It estimated, so research from Red Crow, which came out 2 or 3 years ago, estimates that the average person at the moment sees about 10,000 ad impressions a day. So if you imagine, if you're one of those adverts, you're 1 in 10,000. Now that's firstly a lot more than it was in the past. So with estimates back in the 70s and 80s were around 2,000. Mainly that's because people are spending so much more time online, but also everything is becoming much more branded. So even products we buy in stores, for example, which are one of the prime reasons for people seeing ad impressions. So the average trip to the supermarket, probably you see about 1,000 ad impressions and brands as you walk around. All of that's become a lot more heavily branded, all the products that we're looking at. And you can see this if you go to Tesco, for example, that Tesco has started to rebrand basically its own brand products onto a different brand to try and increase the number of adverts that people are paying attention to. So the question you want to ask yourself as a startup, or we asked ourselves at the beginning of a startup, as a startup or a scale-up company that doesn't have good brand recognition, is what stands out in this field. Now, so there are some things that you can do to make your marketing bold and attention grabbing, but more often than not, the things that stand out from a human to any person looking or surveying the internet are the things they've seen before and the brands they recognize, which makes it doubly hard for smaller brands to break in, right? This is something that I'm sure everyone's kind of noticed before. It's known as its technical word. It was discovered by Bader and Meinhof, so it's sometimes called the Bader and Meinhof theorem. And that's that, if you go out and buy a red Mini, suddenly you see red Minis everywhere. And it's not that there's more red Minis on the street, right? It's that you're now thinking about red Minis and you notice them much more. And it's the same with adverts. If you're thinking about a brand already and it's already in your head, then that's the brand and they're the adverts that are going to stand out for you. So as a new, much smaller brand, the odds are definitely stacked against you. And that's particularly true if you're having to pay for all of your ad impressions. So you're paying for all of the times you're trying to get an advert in front of someone. And there, when I say pay, I don't just mean paying in terms of, cash for for billboards or for event placements or, online placement. I also mean the time you're putting in to producing content that people might come and read, and then posting about that content on LinkedIn, sharing it in comment sections, trying to build a network that you can then feed this information into. All of those things take time, and that is an investment for your business. And when you're small, you really are kind of fighting an uphill battle in that space. Now, luckily, and this is what we try and capitalize on both in our own marketing and in our product, is that not all impressions are paid. And in fact, one of the most powerful tools you can use to cut through the noise are recommendations. So recommendations and referrals to friends. So if we look at this research, it's the biggest research that's ever been done, as far as I'm aware, into people's perceptions of advertising and how people receive advertising and what people pay attention to and what drives their purchasing decisions. The top 2 things that drive people's purchasing decisions are recommendations from people they know and consumer opinions online. So consumers being other people that have bought the product. Now, these sort of reviews and referrals are what you can use to supercharge your marketing, and they're really useful for new businesses. And most startups will find that their first few customers probably come from recommendation, right? And that's not just because your marketing and your sales journey is, not particularly well honed, so selling is hard, but it's also just because you're a new product. It's really hard to build that trust in people, and the place they can get that trust from and get that feeling of security in your product is the people they know, their recommendations. So research shows that an impression, a word of mouth impression, so someone describing your product to someone else, or someone recommending your product to someone else, can be up to 200 times as impactful as a sort of an advert placed online or any other form of ad impression. And that's particularly true for high consideration items. So if you're selling something that's worth a lot of money or involves a large amount of time investment or is a long-term product, then that's where word of mouth really is something that you need to be thinking about. Now, there's lots of behavioral science behind why recommendations are really powerful impressions. And a lot of these things have been kind of adopted by other forms of advertising to try and not mimic recommendations and referrals directly, but reflect the qualities that mean that people pay attention and respond to those things and end up buying products because of them. So firstly, we are innately relatively suspicious as a species, and everyone now understands advertising, broadly speaking. Like the vast majority of people understand advertising and understand that advertising is trying to sell us things. And so an impression or a recommendation is a genuine endorsement. It's unmotivated. And that really improves the response. In lots of studies, it's been shown that basically when you believe someone is being genuine about something, you're much more likely to do what they're asking you to do or to buy a product that they recommend. Now, an interesting thing to talk about here is referrals and referral fees. So there is research to suggest that if you place your referral fee, your reward for a referral in a referral scheme, so that's where you give someone 10% off, say, for referring a friend. If you set that reward too high, then whilst you might get more referrals, you get much less loyalty from the customers who are referred, because they don't see it as a genuine recommendation, right? They see it as just a cheap deal. The other thing which you'll see a lot written about when it comes to why recommendations and referrals are really powerful, and that is social proof. So this is the idea that basically people like to think of themselves as individual a lot of the time, but the vast majority of decisions we take, we actually look to the people around us to guide us, right? And that's because taking risks is inherently dangerous. And so if you can make a decision much more easily by basically deferring that decision to other people or to someone else, then that makes life a lot easier for us and makes us less likely to make bad decisions. Now, there's a good study done on this by Richard Shotton, someone who's written a lot in the marketing science space. And what he showed was he was able to double the interest in a newly imported South African beer by labeling it on the marketing as South Africa's most popular beer. And so just telling people that it was popular somewhere else meant that people were much more likely to be interested in purchasing it. And when they went in a pub, they were more likely to purchase that beer over other beers. Now, an interesting kind of aspect of social proof is that social proof is much, much more powerful when it's from people like us. So the kind of study which best summarized this was a study that was conducted in the early noughties in hotels in America. Now, in nearly every hotel you go into now, there'll be a little card in the bathroom that says, we're trying to make our hotel more sustainable. If you don't want your towels washed, put them back on the rail. If you do want them washed, leave them in the bath or something like that. And what the hotels were doing in this case is they save money, obviously, when they don't have to wash the towels. So it's actually in the hotel's interest to get people to reuse their towels as much as possible. So they did some research with a scientist called Robert Cialdini into how they can make the copy on this card motivate more people to reuse their towels. And what they found was the most powerful thing they could do to the copy out of all the things they tried. And the things they tried included, stronger environmental messages, giving people kind of extra information about how much water it was saving and things like that. They found that the strongest thing they could do was to tell people that other people were reusing their towels. So you could tell people that, for example, half of hotel users reuse their towels, and that increased the number of people who were reusing their towels. But then they went one step further, and they started, instead of just talking about other people in hotels, they started relating the messages to the people in the rooms. So, for example, if it was an American staying, they'd say half of Americans reuse their towels, and that again added to the number of towels that were reused. And interestingly, what they found the most powerful message they could use, which was overall a 20% increase in the number of people reusing towels, was to use a message which said 70% of people who stay in this room reuse their towels. So people, if you can make a small group of people that relates to, in this case, the hotel users, but if you think about this in marketing context, you can take a small group of people that relates to like your ideal customers and say, basically, X number of our ideal customers endorse this. A much stronger kind of feeling of social proof amongst people. We also get, and this is why kind of comes into why social proof is important for word of mouth recommendations. We also get a very biased view of the world from the people around us. So social proof is important, but most people's social proof is not actually driven by marketing and the messages in marketing. It's driven by their people around them. So, if I see a marketing message which says 100% of people wear Nike trainers, now I'm like, well, I know some people who don't wear Nike trainers, so that can't be true. And I'm much more likely to reflect the opinions of my friends and the people I hang around with than the marketing I see. And this sort of social aspect of social proof and the social aspect of the society we live in is what we really use at Herdify to try and get the most out of our marketing. And that's because we use something we call multiplicity. And what that is basically, in the same way that you need multiple ad impressions, like we discussed at the beginning, to generate interest in online ads, you actually need multiple reinforcements of recommendations and referrals to get them to be paid attention to. And this is summarized best, really, by a study that was done on a US campus by Damon Centola, who's a kind of behavioral scientist, mathematician. And he had a referral scheme effectively for a fitness program. And he investigated how many referrals it took for people to sign up. And what he found was that it was the fourth referral that was kind of the most powerful and gave the greatest chance of signing up. Now, what that means is from a marketing point of view, that's actually really hard, right? You might be able to generate one referral from one person to another, but generating 4 referrals to a potential new customer, so not someone you know about, is actually really difficult. But luckily, the way that society is structured can help us do this. The easiest way of thinking about this is that 2 people who know each other are more likely to have a mutual friend than 2 random people, right? So everyone's kind of had it. They go to a party at a friend's house and they see someone else they know there, and they didn't know that you both knew the person who hosted the party, right? So we cluster together basically in society in groups of people who know each other well. And this is a well-known phenomenon. It's been studied in kind of human society for pretty much the whole of the last century. And what it means for marketing is that grouping referrals together is easier than it might necessarily seem. Because if someone's received one referral, or let's put it another way, if someone refers 2 people and one of those people signs up, there's a high chance that the person who didn't sign up could receive another referral from the same person, from the other person who received the referral. So we have these groups of people who the messages and the advertising and the word of mouth impressions bounce around. And that allows you to get to this higher number of recommendations more quickly than you might necessarily expect. So that's the theory. How do you actually use this in marketing? So our goal here is to use marketing and again capitalize on the power of word of mouth and the power of recommendations and referrals. And then combine with that our knowledge that, okay, we actually need the people to receive multiple referrals. And that's what people will respond most to. Now, I've chosen 4 sort of what are kind of broadly talking channels, but you might call like touch points or like considerations of marketing, and just thought about how you can use this knowledge to maximize the impacts of those channels or those types of marketing. So whenever we talk about word of mouth and social influence, people bring up influencers, right? They're a bit of a buzzword in marketing at the moment. People are spending a lot more money on influencers. You know, there are products that are basically being introduced solely through influencers. And the key here, I would say, is to target influencers with overlapping communities, right? Try and get the same person. If you think about your potential customer, you want them to be hearing the message from multiple influencers, right? Not just from one big influencer, because A, they see that a bit more of advertising, and B, you're not getting those multiple impressions from them. If you want kind of a slightly inverted or meta version of this being very successful, there was a bikini brand whose name I forget, who had tried to get, I think they had tried to get one of the Kardashians to be an influencer for them, and she wouldn't, basically, or she wasn't responding to them. So what they did was they started sending bikinis to her friends. And in the end, they managed to convince her to work with them because her friends were already were part of their influencer program, and she wanted, to come in on it. Similarly, with referrals, we can use that message that I spoke about on the previous slide. So the idea of referral chains, that if someone comes to you via a referral, then encouraging them to refer means that you're more likely to hit for them to refer to people who have already had a referral from someone else, because they're in that network, that cluster, that group of people who is using your product already. Reviews are very popular at the moment, partly because, especially in the e-commerce space, because of proliferation of e-commerce, of kind of review technologies, and they've really because of that, there's a lot of competition in the market. There's a lot of innovation going on in the market. Now, one thing people talk about a lot is how do you present your reviews in aggregate on your website? So you can list reviews, but also how do you encourage people to have or to pay attention to those numbers? One thing we know, for example, is that if you just put 5-star, average rating on a website, that's far less impactful than showing people the reviews. And so when you're aggregating, it's much better to get this idea of multiplicity to talk about numbers rather than averages. So averages give you a quality of the product, but actually people respond more to the kind of social proof of saying, in this case, for example, like over 1,000 5-star reviews. And then word of mouth as a channel. Now, as I said, for startups and scale ups, this is actually disproportionately where a lot of your time is spent. And you can either, and what we find is like some people just let this happen, but actually by taking control and kind of trying to take control of it, you can maximize the effects and capitalize on that make it much more effective and also make it much quicker. And here what you can do is you can target adverts to word of mouth. Now I've said areas because that's how we do it in our product, to maximize the number of word of mouth impressions, but more kind of practically or more in a more diverse way. You can just try and target your adverts to people that maybe already know your brand. So think about who might already know your brand, target your adverts towards them, and then try and get them talking about your brand. So if you're on LinkedIn, target not just the people you directly want to sell to, but the people who are in the space, or the industry that might not be the perfect person to buy your product, but they might pass they might pass your advert on to someone who is in the perfect place to buy your product. For example, you might, and we've done this before, like we've had ad campaigns which target digital teams, so science teams in smaller businesses, because they're very close to marketing. So whilst they're not directly going to buy our product, they will pass on information to marketing. And also if they get in a discussion about us with marketing, rather than having nothing to contribute, they can say, oh, I have seen them and, I understand what they do and it sounds like a cool idea. So that's kind of different ideas of how we can apply it. A lot of those, though, still don't really answer the question of how we did it when we started out and how we are still doing it at the moment. We're still a small business. We're still using all these, we're still using different ideas and all these ideas in our marketing day to day. So as a company that's starting out, there's kind of two things to think about, right? And this is quite big in marketing science, mainly because of one man in particular called Byron Sharp, who's very, very noisy and very aggressive on LinkedIn, if you want to follow him. And he talks a lot about these two concepts he have of mental and physical availability. So the idea that someone has to purchase your product, someone has to both be able to purchase it. So he talks a lot about FMCG, so like Coke and big food brands, right? So they've got to be in a shop that sells it. That's the physical availability, but much more important is the mental availability. They have to be able to think of you when they want to solve their problem. Now, in the consumer space, it sort of depends what product you're selling, but another way of thinking about this is time in market, and this is particularly the case in B2B, right? In B2B, selling, you're more often than not selling to people and advertising at people who just aren't in market for your product, right? They might, you're not in the sales cycle for them. They aren't the right size to be purchasing your product at that point. They're not looking to replace their review system or their ad targeting system at the moment. And really, at any point in time, you're lucky if 5% of the people in your category are trying to buy your product. And what mental availability means is that you want to be in the position that when they do go to solve that business problem, yours is the brand and your brand is just in the discussion, right? It's at top of mind, it's in the discussion. So particularly at Herdify, how we thought about this, we had a bit of a problem when we thought about our product in this context. So we're an online SaaS portal. We're also actually a remote business, so we all work scattered across the country. So we could provide our business services to effectively anyone in the world. So our physical availability is really high, but we had no mental availability, right? No one knew who we are, no one knew what we did. And also, and this is a particular challenge for us, we're not like replacing another solution, we're an additional solution. So whilst we answer to people's problems, they're not directly already looking for something that helps us target performance marketing at word of mouth, unfortunately. And the first thing we learned, and we talk about a lot, is to embrace randomness and accept the opportunities that emerge from that, right? And now one of our directors, who's been doing this a lot longer than me, and been working in marketing for about 25 years, he's another data guy. He's kind of made it his goal to get marketers to be happy with letting go of control of their marketing, right? And there is one instance in which marketers are actually very happy to do this, and that's virality, right? Marketers love it when something goes viral and they lose control of it. And you can think about the same sort of thing, but for your brand. You've got to let people talk about your brand and discuss it in their own way and lose that sense of control. And what I mean particularly, or what that means that I think you should do in kind of, and take opportunities that emerge from randomness. So even when you're selling to everyone, clusters will appear because of word of mouth. That mean that some industries, some niches, some places, and geography is important, and I'll come back to that, will end up understanding and knowing your brand a lot more than anything else. And it's tempting in those cases to try and understand that and then recreate those conditions elsewhere, rather than what I think you should, what you could actually do to maximize the power of word of mouth in those areas is actually lead into it, right? Target those places. So what you do is you can target those places or those industries, those niches where you see sales, inquiries, word of mouth picking up, target those with marketing and speed those things along the funnel, and also reinforce all of that. And what that will give you, and what you will see, is that those niches will grow and grow and grow. And you should be able to capitalize on that when it comes to your sales process. The other thing we did at the beginning, and as I said, geographic links are really important and actually determine a lot of the time who we talk to. The key we found here was to focus on a particular place or a particular location or a particular region, but try and think small. Think about we wanted effectively to target a group of people in the industry who would talk to each other, see each other a lot, and therefore be able to talk about us, where we would have conversations where people on both sides of a conversation would already understand who our brand was, whilst that number of people who actually understand our brand might be in the thousands in the country, right? So you've got a very small number of people who know your brand across the country. What we wanted was to have conversations able to happen between people who both know our brand. And so what we did in this case was we chose a place to target, right? Now, we kind of summarize this in, you can't compete with the brand Apple's, Apple as a brand worldwide, but you could compete in a neighborhood or on a business park, right? You could imagine you will get to a point where on a business park, everyone knows who Apple is and everyone knows who your brand is. Now, if you have a physical location, that's a great place to start. We didn't have a physical location, and therefore we had to choose somewhere. And this is what else you can do if you're either outgrowing your current niche in a physical location you're in, or you're just kind of want to think more broadly, or you don't have a physical location like us, is you can think about where is the best place that conversations like this are likely to happen, and where is the place you can go that will target that. So what we did, we looked at all the companies in the UK, looked at the ones we want to target, the sort of companies we want to target, found out as much information as we could about where their marketing departments were based, and then ended up focusing on a place. In our case, that was Bristol. Well, we selected a short list of places, which were basically Bristol, Manchester, Leeds, and then focused on Bristol because we have kind of stronger links to Bristol and it's an easier place for us to get to. And this has been, we found this to be really powerful. So what we've been doing in Bristol, we've been targeting events, even just attending free events. And we've ended up meeting the same people repeatedly, and we've got great partnerships out of that, but we've also built brand out of that. You know, we've got to the extent that even by like the second or third event we were going to, people we had never met were telling us they had heard about our brand and asking us more about it. And that, you know, that was brilliant. Without paying for any events, we had people asking us what we were doing because they had a vague idea and they wanted to know more. Some other ideas we've used, like we've sponsored events, and where we sponsor events, what we try and do is like, how can we actually get people to remember our brand from sponsoring the event? And a really good thing that we found is that we have a code word to get free drinks, right? And the code word's the brand. So, you know, it seems a bit silly, but just making someone say your name, they get told your name when you come in because they get told what the code word is. And secondly, they say your name every time they want a drink. It just gets that recognition in their head. So then when they go away, they can be like, they can relate your brand to other people. And that we found being really powerful. And as a result, yeah, we found that we can kind of build a brand in Bristol that people actually start to recognize. And that's the goal. And we're not concerned that it's not nationwide. Our sales are still nationwide. We turned off any sales, but we managed to make a dent in marketing in a way that really we were working for probably 6 months before we switched to this strategy. And in that time, what we found was we would generate marketing leads, but they'd tail off. And we'd go in sort of fits and starts, right? We'd have a campaign that went really well. It's like, great, right, let's do more of that. But actually doing more of that was really hard. And what we found is we now got to the way where we can produce consistent results and we can grow this area around Bristol and increase our incoming marketing leads. So that is everything I kind of had to say. And we'll be really happy now to answer any questions that people have.
Hi, Ed. I'm just coming back in, bear with me.
That's all right.
Hi, right, start video. Here we go. So we have had a few questions come in. I've got some in the chat, so I'll just, here we go. So the first one was from Jess Denny. Thank you, Jess. And she said, what are the differences here between B2C and B2B marketing? So some of the examples that you talked about were TV, billboards, movies, etc., but don't seem so relevant for B2B, but maybe I'm wrong, from Jess.
I think that's a really good point. B2B and B2C and D2C do have some differences. I think, so we're called Herdify, right? We talk about people marketing to herds. Now, your herd for D2C is different to your herd for B2B, right? The principal issue in B2B compared to like in the vast majority of B2B versus D2C is that the number of customers is much lower and the people that you're targeting are much more spread out, right? So when you're doing this in B2B marketing, you want to be looking at targeting the herd of people that could buy your product and also would talk about your product. So it's important to think that the herd that will talk about your product is the people in the industry, even if they're not actually in the positions that would purchase your product. So in terms of tactics, what that means is, I think a good way of thinking about this is, how do we capitalize upon these herds when it comes to the sort of tactics that we're already using? So B2B tactics, sponsoring events, going to industry events, going to big, conferences, things like that. LinkedIn marketing to a certain extent, but I'll talk about events first. So for events, it's like, okay, how can we get as many, even at the biggest event you might go to, only a handful of people will have actually heard of your brand, especially as a startup brand. But what you really want is as many of them as possible at the event. So rather than trying to find new people all the time, just try and find the same people again. And then they are the seeds that can kind of talk to other people about you at that event. And that makes the event much more effective for you. The other thing is this idea of target a particular business park or something like that, right? If there are places where lots of people, or like areas of a city where there are lots of relevant businesses, then maybe do higher value out marketing there, like billboards, because it's targeted and there's lots of potential buyers and you're hoping to generate those conversations that actually can become more effective than spending lots and lots of money on LinkedIn ads spread all over the country, right? The same goes for your, any sort of like LinkedIn campaigns, try and target places or groups of people, communities, the same with that are likely to talk to each other. The same with LinkedIn, like commenting and that sort of brand building. Try and do that so the same people are seeing your comments. Build your authority and your network that way.
Right, thank you, Ed. So next question from Gillian Carmichael. Thank you, Gillian. Is it best to use a third-party tool to embed reviews on your website? Does that appear more genuine?
Yes, and in fact, I saw a piece of research this morning from an agency in Bristol that said not only do you need do you want to embed the third-party tool, you want to provide the links to the third-party tool. So people can read and use all the tool stuff to read and search the reviews themselves. A really interesting concept in social proof, and this is kind of an advert for them, is Yotpo have recently introduced location-based reviews as well. So you can serve up. For me, I live in Bristol, so I can be served reviews from other people in Bristol. And there is, the ideas of social proof are that I will relate to those people more. I will see the product as like something that other people similar to me are using. And that makes them more powerful.
Right, thank you, Ed. Question that's coming through the Q&A from Your Flock. Thank you, Dan. For a B2B brand like Your Flock, this is creating the old-fashioned water cooler moment. It used to be for high-end sales, you needed 7 different people to chip in. So is this still the case? I think you might be able to read that on the Q&A as well.
Yes, yeah. So in terms of, this number 7 comes up quite a lot in quite a lot of parts of sales and marketing. People do talk about 7 marketing impressions. And people also, talk about, having to talk to lots of people for sales on both sides of the argument. I'm not sure which side is it Dan is talking about here. So if he's thinking about 7 contact points on your side or 7 contact points on the other side, what these conversations, if you can motivate your conversations in the company you're selling to, right, it can dramatically accelerate. I think it should dramatically accelerate purchasing decisions, right? The number of purchasing decisions you've been in where the first meeting is, I want to buy this, and everyone basically has a meeting and then goes, right, well, I'm going to go and research this myself because I've never heard of it, right? It's amazing how powerful that I've never heard of it is as a blocker to particularly high value sales in a business context. I mean, from my own experience, if I'm looking to purchase, data science software, for example, I will always ask other people in that job long before I'll ask sort of anyone from the company to try and explain it to. Because the company or the seller always has an idea of how you could use it. And actually the company itself the seller always has an idea of how you could use it, but users are much more useful in that. Now, so for high value sales, you're unlikely to have multiple users in an organization, but buying everyone into the process early on can definitely, I think, speed up that process, and just having that brand in mind makes life a lot easier for you as a sales team.
Great, thanks, Ed. We've got about 7 more questions. I think we'll just about be able to fit them in.
Okay.
So the next one again from Gillian. Can you do neighbourhood events online, or do you think they work better in person at a location?
I think they work better in person. I think nearly everyone I talk to about this, kind of casually, is of the opinion that they're glad that events are back, right? And they want to go to them. So it is the case of, it's probably better to do them in person if possible. And this also comes, I think, from appreciating the sort of sporadic nature of these things. Like, it's useful to kind of attend events to understand what's going on and to understand the tone of the event and what I don't think you get that online. And I don't think when you go to an event, it's not just the attendees that you might sponsor an event and be able to sell to the attendees effectively or market to the attendees. But I think it's important to go to other people's events and market yourself at those, just to reinforce those communications, because unless you might have an endless marketing budget, but you probably don't have an endless marketing budget to pay for the number of events you really want to generate conversations.
Great, thank you. Next question from Jess Forbes. Advice on how the current do you have any advice on how the current cost of living can challenge behavioural science learnings?
So I think something that's really interesting in this is like trade down, right? So particularly in the consumer space. So, it's a sad state of the world, but keeping up with the Joneses is important and for people. And so when people are trading down, that information about like cheaper alternatives is often spread by word of mouth. And on top of that, there's like then a kind of recognition, acceptance that that's kind of a good thing to do, right? And so from a brand perspective, if you're a lower end brand, you want to capitalize on that, try and motivate people to talk about your brand, and talk explicitly about that comparison, right? Why did you switch to us? If you're a brand that's losing customers at the moment, then a much more powerful thing to be able to do is to be defensive, right? And that's ideas of social proof, and that other people aren't trading down from your brand or just stopping purchasing. They decided other people aren't deciding they don't need that luxury. Really motivates retention in your own customers. Another thing to think about is that word of mouth and these discussions act as extra touch points for people to remember the value of the brand.
Okay, great, thank you. A question from Gary Connor. Gary from Wardwiz, hello. Gary says, we have a free app full of tips and advice to help parents keep their children safer online. Any suggestions on how we maximize take up on a small budget?
So when it comes to apps are particularly free apps, they're quite hard to market. Sorry, that's what I mean. They're quite hard to track the marketing on historically. But when you look at some of the most useful apps, the most used apps worldwide, they actually share something in common. And that's that they started by targeting specific locations. You look at Facebook, Tinder, Uber, anything that a lot of the big kind of social apps started targeting specific locations. Facebook started in university, Tinder started in one city in America, Uber started in LA. And the reason these companies did that really was because they had a particular problem, which is relates to the fact that they need both. So they need to form a network quickly and potential connections quickly. And I would say that a social app like that probably has some of the similar things, that whilst you have a free app full of tips and advice, like people will share that information to each other. And if you have any sort of interactivity between users on your app, then that is much more likely between people who already know each other than people who are new to the app. And for that reason, like I would suggest trying to maximize take up in a small area, be that finding where you already have the most users and try and expand there, or finding an area that you think is particularly relevant to you and then growing from there.
Great, thank you, Ed. We've got 6 more minutes, a few more questions to get through. I think we can do it. From Charlie Royal, where does influencer marketing fit into what you've talked about today?
So I think influencers sit across the behavioural, the kind of the word of mouth spectrum. And I would say there's very much a big difference. There's a big spectrum of influence of what's lumped into influencer marketing. At one end, you have big influencers, you know, your Kardashians that we spoke about before, and even like people who have, you know, millions of followers. And there you're really talking about, it's just a new type of advert, right? Everyone understands that it's an advert. You get impressions out of it because people watch their videos and things like that, but it's just a different type of advert and a different type of media, right? It's kind of replacing radio and television of the past because that's what younger people are spending their time looking at. At the other end of the scale, you have micro-influencers, and that's where things get much more interesting because they're much more trusted. If you look at surveys, they are much more trusted for recommendations. And also the micro-influencers themselves tend to be much more strict about who they work with. And for those reasons, that's where I think finding micro-influencers with interacting communities is where you can really kind of supercharge any sort of micro-influencer activity and get a lot more value for your money as well when it comes to starting a smaller brand.
Great, thank you. Great question from Jess Forbes here. Are people's heads getting smaller or larger? So are people seeking new advice to cope or shutting down distractions or increased skepticism due to stress beyond their realm of action? This is mostly in reference to D2C marketing across email and social.
So that's a really interesting question. So there was some research done, this was much longer time ago, that basically while the number of people we know and we might have the address for has increased a lot recently, the number of people we could actually remember on the spot and talk about has remained pretty constant, about 150, basically forever. Now, what that suggests is our herds don't change, but sort of and we have some sort of social filter that hasn't changed, and we sort of talk about a much smaller number of people that we take recommendations from rather than the people we actually know and have contact with. And what I suspect kind of Jesse's getting at there is that yes, there are types of noise that we might filter out, but, and this is going out on a little bit of a scientific limb here, our evolution, we are as animals, the social learning is the most fundamental part of kind of humanity. It's what we've been doing for a very long time. So I suspect that is the hardest to turn off.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple left about reviews. So I'll put them together. So hopefully we can start. Firstly do you have any recommendations of third-party tools for reviews? And that's number one. And second one is from Kevin McCall. Our average Trustpilot review response rate is 5%. We are already higher than this, but what would you suggest to smash this average response rate? So what tools would you recommend, and how can people get good response rates for reviews?
So I would say, so I have no experience using any of the review platforms. And I would, if I was to purchase one, I would, value being able to do exactly what the second question is asking, which is be able to generate reviews. So how well do they integrate into, for example, something like Klaviyo or like email management, that sort of thing, so they can generate reviews. And also, I spend most of my day looking at data. What sort of data do they collect about reviewers, and how easy is it to hook that up to your product data, your customer database, and things like that, so you can understand how reviews are affecting purchases. In terms of how you can drive up your review, your number of reviews. So I think you can use social proof in a big way here. So firstly, think about telling people that other people do review you. Also, people love, to a certain extent, helping other people. So tell people that how many people find reviews useful. If you're able to do that, if you're able to, monitor incoming traffic for I found the reviews useful, then you can use that number and motivate people to help customers in the future. Those sorts of ideas of both social proof and then also, getting people to help other people feel like they're helping other customers, not you as a business. They would be my top tips.
Brilliant. That's everything. Ed, that was an amazing session. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and allowing us to record this so I can share it with everyone after. I know we are just about on time, but do you have any final words for our audience today before we finish?
No, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for everyone for coming. I'm happy to kind of talk about this with anyone who kind of wants to follow up after the session. I've just got a few resources. These are on the slide deck, which I think will be shared, and the session's been recorded as well. So just a few resources where people talk about behavioral science, and in particular, the sort of copying and the social sides of behavioral science. So there's a couple of books and a few podcasts, and really recommend the ARIA newsletters. I'm not really sure how to say that. I've only ever seen it written down. That's a weekly newsletter which basically condenses marketing behavioral science into a short newsletter, and it's free. So if you're kind of a nascent marketing team, I think that's something that's really useful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you.